Jack London to build the fire. Day had broken cold and grey, exceedingly cold and grey, when the man turned aside from the manual contrail and climbed the high earth bank, while a dim and little traveled trail, and eastward through the vast spectral timberland. It was a steep bank, and he paused for breath at the pub, excusing the act to himself by looking at his watch. It was 9 o'clock. There was no sun, no hint of sun, though there was not a cloud in the sky. It was a clear day, and yet there seemed an intangible power over the face of things, a subtle gloom that made the day dark, and that was due to the absence of sun. This fact did not worry the man. He was used to the lack of sun. It had been days since he had seen the sun, and he knew that a few more days must pass before that cheerful orb, due south, would just keep above the skyline and dim immediately from view. The man flung a look back along the way he had come. The U-turn lay a mile wide, and hidden under 3 feet of ice. On top of these ice were as many feet of snow. It was all pure white, rolling in gentle undulation while the ice jams of the freeze-up had formed. North and south, as far as his eyes could see, it was unbroken white, save for a dark hairline that curved and twisted from around the spruce-covered island to the south, and that curved and twisted away into the north, where it disappeared behind another spruce-covered island. This dark hairline was the trail, the main trail, that led south 500 miles to the Chilcoot Pipes, Dyea, and the Saltwater, and that led north 17 miles to Dawson, and still on to the north 1,000 miles to Natal, and finally to St. McConnell on Bellner Sea, 1,000 miles and half 1,000 more. But all this, the mysterious, far-reaching hairline trail, the absence of sun from the sky, the tremendous cold, and the strangeness and the wildness of it all, made no impression on the man. It was not because he was long used to it. He was a newcomer in the land, a Chelco, and this was his first winter. The trouble with him was that he was without imagination. He was quick and alert in the things of life, but only in the things, and not in the significances. 50 degrees below zero meant 80-odd degrees of frost. Such fact impressed him as being cold and uncomfortable, and that was all. It did not lead him to meditate upon his frailty as a creature of temperature, and upon man's frailty in general, able only to live within certain narrow limits of heat and cold. And from there on, it did not lead him to conjectural field of immortality and man's place in the universe. 50 degrees below zero stood for a bite of frost that hurt and that must be guarded against by the use of mittens, air flaps, warm moccasins, and thick socks. 50 degrees below zero was to him just precisely 50 degrees below zero. That should be anything more to it than was a thought that never entered his head. As he turned to go on, he spat speculatively. There was a sharp, explosive crackle that startled him. He spat again, and again in the air before it could fall to snow. The speckle crackled. He knew that at 50 below speckle crackled on the snow, but this speckle had crackled in the air. Undoubtedly, it was colder than 50 below. How much colder he did not know. But the temperature did not matter. He was bound for the old claim on the left fork of Hanson Creek, while the boys were already. They had come over across the divide from the Indian Creek country. while he had come the roundabout way to take a look at the possibilities of getting out logs in the spring from the islands in the U-turn. He would be in to camp by 6 o'clock. A bit after dark, it was true, but the boys would be there. A fire would be going, and a hot supper would be ready. As for lunch, he pressed his hand against the protruding bundle under his jacket. It was also under his shirt, wrapped up in a handkerchief and lying against the naked skin. It was the only way to keep the biscuits from freezing. He smiled agreeably to himself as he thought of those biscuits, each cut open and soaked in bacon grease, and each enclosing a generous smile of big fat bacon. He plunged in among the big trees. The trail was faint. The foot of snow had fallen since the last sled had passed over, and he was glad he was without a sled, traveling light. In fact, he carried nothing but the lunch wrapped in the handkerchief. He was surprised, however, at the cold. It certainly was cold, he concluded, as he rubbed his numb nose and champed bones with his mittened hand. He was a warm, whiskered man, but the hair on his face did not protect the high cheekbones and the eager nose that thrust itself aggressively into the frosty air. At the man's heel trotted a dog, a big native husky, the proper wolf dog, gray-coated and without any visible or temperamental difference. Its brother, the white wolf. The animal was depressed by the tremendous cold. It knew that it was no time for traveling. Its instinct told it a truer tale was told to the man by the man's judgment. In reality, it was not merely colder than 50 below zero. It was colder than 60 below, than 70 below. It was 75 below zero. Since the freezing point is 32 above zero, it meant that 107 degrees of frost obtained. The dog did not know anything about monuments. Possibly in its brain there was no sharp consciousness of condition of very cold such as was in a man's brain, but the brute had its instinct. It experienced it a vague but menacing apprehension that subdued and made it slink along the man's heels and make it question eagerly every unknown movement of the man, as if expecting him to go into camp or to seek shelter somewhere and build a fire. The dog had learned fire, and it wanted fire, or else to burrow under the snow and cuddle its warmth away from the air. The frozen moisture of its building had settled on its fur in a fine powder of frost, and especially were its jaws, muzzle, and eyelashes written by its crystal breath. The man's bread, beard, and muscle were likewise, but more solidly. The, the, the deposit taking the form of ice and increasing with every warm, moist breath he exhaled. Also, the man was chewing tobacco, and the muzzle of ice held his lips so rigidly he was unable to clear his he was unable to clear his chin when he expelled the juice. The result was that a crystal bread of color and solidity of amber was increasing its length on his chin. If he fell down, it would shatter itself like glass into brittle fragments, but he did not mind it the prejudice. It was a penalty all tobacco chewers paid in that country, and he had been out before in 2 cold snaps. They had not been so cold as this, he knew, but the spirit temperature at 60 miles they had registered at, at 50 below, and at 55 he held on through the level stretch of woods for several miles, crossed a wild flat of niggerheads, and dropped down a bank to the frozen bed of a small stream. This was Henderson Creek, and he knew he was 10 miles from the Fox. He looked at his watch. It was 10 o'clock. He was making 4 miles an hour, and he calculated that he would arrive at the Fox at 12:30. He decided to celebrate that event by eating his lunch there. The dog dropped in again at his heels, with a tail dropping a judgment as the man swung along the creek bed. The furrow of the old slow track was plainly visible, but a dozen inches of snow covered the marks of the last runners. In the months no man had come up down that silent creek. The man held steadily on. He was not much given to thinking, and just then particularly he had nothing to think about, save that he would eat lunch at the Fox, and that at 6 o'clock he would be in camp with the boys. There was nobody to talk to, and, had there been, speech would have been impossible because of the ice muzzle on his mouth, so he continued monotonously to chew tobacco and to increase the length of his armed beard. Once in a while, the thought irritated itself that it was very cold and that he had never experienced such cold. As he walked along, he rubbed his cheekbones and nose with the back of his mittened hand. He did this automatically, now and again changing hands, but rubber he would. The instant he stopped, his cheekbones went numb, and the following instant the end of his nose went numb. He was sure to frost his cheeks. He knew that and experienced a pang of regret that he had not devised a nosebelt of the sort Bart wore in cold naps, such a strap passed across the cheeks as well and saved them, but it didn't matter much. After all, what were frosted cheeks? A bit painful, that was all. They were never serious. Empty as the man's mind was of thoughts, he was keenly observant, and he noticed the changes in the creek, the curves and bends and timber jams, and always he sharply noted where he placed his feet. Once coming round a bend, he shied abruptly, like a startled horse, kept away from the place where he had been walking, and retreated several paces back along the trail. The creek, he knew, was frozen clear to the bottom. No creek could contain water in Arctic water, but he knew also that there was springs that bubbled out from the hillsides and ran along under the snow and on top of the ice of the creek. He knew that the cold-seized snaps never frozen their streams, and he knew likewise their danger. They were traps. They hid pools of water under the snow that might be 3 inches deep or 3 feet. Sometimes a skin of ice half an inch thick covered them, and in turn was covered by the snow. Sometimes there were alternative layers of water and ice skin, so that when one broke through, he kept on breaking through for a while, sometimes wetting himself to the waist. That was why he had shied in such panic. He had felt the give under his feet, and heard the crack of snow-hidden ice skin, and to get his feet wet in such a temperature meant trouble and danger. At the very least it meant delay, for he would be forced to stop and build a fire, and under its protection to bare his feet, while he dried his socks and moccasins. He stood and studied the creek bed and its banks, and decided that the flow of water came from the right. He reflected the while, rubbing his nose and cheeks, then skirted to the left, stepping gingerly, and testing the footing for each step. Once clear of danger, he took a fresh chew of tobacco and swung along at his 4-mile gait. In the course of the next 2 hours, he came upon several similar traps. Usually the snow above the hidden pools had a sunken, candid appearance that advertised the danger. Once again, however, he had a close call, and once suspecting danger, he compelled the dog to go on in front. The dog did not want to go. It hung back until the man shoved it forward, and then it went quickly across the wide, unbroken surface. Suddenly it broke through, floundered to one side, and go away to firmer footing. It had wet its forefoot and legs, and almost immediately the water that clung it to turned to ice. It made quick effort to lick the ice off its legs, then dropped down in the snow and began to bite out the ice that had formed between the toes. This was a matter of instant. To permit the ice to remain would mean sore feet. It did not know it. It merely obeyed the mysterious prompting that arose from the deep crypts of its being. But the man knew, having achieved a judgment on a subject, and he removed the mitten from his right hand and helped tear out the ice petals. He did not expose his finger more than a minute, and was astonished at the swift numbness that smote them. It certainly was cold. He put on the mitten hastily, and beat the hand savagely across his chest. At 12 o'clock, the day was at its brightest, yet the sun was too far south on its winter journey to clear the horizon. The blood of the earth intervened between it, while the beat hand savagely across his chest. At 12 o'clock, the day was at its brightest, yet the sun was too far south on its winter journey to clear the horizon. The bulge of the earth intervened between it and Hendon Creek, while the man walked under a clear sky at noon and cast no shadow. At 12:30 to the minute, he arrived at the forks of the tracks. He was pleased at the speed he made. If he kept it up, he would certainly be with the boys by 6. He unbuttoned his jacket and shirt, and drew forth his lunch. The action consumed no more than a quarter of a minute, yet in that brief moment the numbness laid hold of the exposed fingers. He did not put the mitten on, but instead struck the fingers a dozen sharp smashes against his leg. Then he sat down on a snow-covered log to eat. The sting that followed upon the striking of his fingers against his leg ceased so quickly that he was startled. He had no chance to take a bite of biscuit. He struck the fingers repeatedly and returned them to the mitten. baring the other hand for the purpose of eating. He tried to take a mouthful, but the ice muzzle prevented. He had forgotten to bite a file and so out. He chuckled at his foolishness, and he noticed the numbness creeping into the exposed fingers. Also, he noted that the sticking which had first come to his toes when he sat down was already passing away. He wondered whether the toes were warm or numb. He moved them inside the moccasins and decided that they were numb. He pulled the mitten on hurriedly and stood up. He was a bit frantic. He jumped up and down until the stinging extended into the feet. It certainly was cold, was his thought. But the man from Sulphur Creek had broken the truth when telling how cold it sometimes got in the country, and he had laughed at him at the time. That showed one must not be sure of things. There was no mistake about it. It was cold. He strode up and down, stamping his feet and flashing his arms, until reassured by the warning warmth.